Well, it's February the 24th, and I guess the topic of interest to me today is yesterday's hearings on the January the 6th riot at the Capitol. I still am going to stick with the term riot. Insurrection is way overstating what occurred. But I think one of the interesting things was it came up in here in the discussion is the writing into the record of J. Michael Waller, who's PhD in international security affairs, has quite a background apparently in a variety of operations. Since he was involved with the Contras, I think back in the 80s, I think this guy is kind of a retired operator or something. But at any rate, interesting case, because apparently he went to the protest at the Capitol, although he apparently was kind of more as an observer than as a participant, and describes what happened and wrote an article up on which I'll attach here in the information below. I think you'll find this all kind of interesting. By the way, remember to subscribe, and if you like this, give me a like, and any comments are appreciated. But get into this subject. Essentially, what he observed there, and he is this description he had, which Senator Klobuchar is calling a, quote, conspiracy theory, even though, as I'd point out, it's not a theory. It's the observations of somebody who was there observing things firsthand and had some expertise in this sort of subject. In other words, he's a person who's a bit of a professional on these kind of activities and understand, the study of them and so forth. And he apparently is part of a private intelligence service, I presume, that companies and maybe even governments contract out to for advice on the security of their personnel and that kind of thing, in these incidents. So anyhow, get to the subject here. Basically, what he described is that basically, one thing is he thought that the police security at that event, as they approached the Capitol, as the group approached the Capitol, was incredibly light. And he was sort of surprised at that because given the size of the group and everything, you'd expect there to be a bit more of a robust police presence. And then he basically describes the idea that it intermingled in what was basically a group which was certainly a little bit too old in general for a normal, rioting group, There were a group of people that stood out to him from his expertise, and they included basically some people that were, kind of what he calls the plainclothes militants, and then there were people in camouflage who presumably are the militia members who probably are now being arrested by the FBI, and then there were some people there that were in MAGA gear but didn't look right. And his presumption is they were infiltrators from the leftist groups like Antifa. and so these different groups were in the crowd, spread out in the crowd, and essentially these people, when they basically instigated a confrontation, and then when the police responded, perhaps inappropriately, with using tear gas a little too early and having not enough people physically present to block them, this sort of set the crowd into kind of an ugly mood, and then these agitators in the mood basically were saying things like, don't retreat, don't back off, don't give ground, go forward, we're going to take the Capitol, and stuff like this. And so essentially this sort of confirms what I've been speculating in previous videos about the subject, that essentially there was a small pre-planned group of agitators in the crowd that manipulated the crowd into launching the riot at the Capitol, and probably these are the people that did the most, quote, damage, unquote, and basically the other people were sort of led along by mob psychology when the thing turned violent, and essentially, you have a group of people, like I said, that were basically pro-police are now fighting the police, if you will, or at least some of them were. However, most of the violence is probably perpetrated largely by many of the agitators and perhaps some other people that got carried away with the whole process, which means that a lot of these people are also sort of victims of manipulation. and that's a very good article, just to read it and get your own perceptions from what he said. But I think that the way Klobuchar is trying to spin things is that this is a, quote, conspiracy theory. It's not even a theory. It's about firsthand observation. And in reality, I don't know why this individual isn't subpoenaed and brought before the panel for their testimony. I mean, you need to have different perceptions. And so I think that's a very interesting development here. And it's kind of what we thought all along, I believe, that this was not this was definitely not a Trump instigation at all. This was basically something where a group of people managed to hijack the protest for their own purposes. The other aspect of the hearings, which were further interesting, and I think that kind of, if those that didn't have time to watch it, I can understand that. I didn't watch all. I watched quite a bit of it though, and I think that essentially. What I see about this is that there's some real contradictions among the, between the Capitol Police, sergeants at arms, and those kind of people amongst each other, and there's really some misperceptions over time frames and why the National Guard wasn't deployed in a timely manner and so forth. And there really is over an hour of discrepancy between what different people had related about the incident, and I think the Senator Blunt got to that in some of his questioning. And so I think what we're looking at, it's an interesting subject which has to be pursued a little further to find out what really happened. But I'm still wondering why the security was as light as it was. But basically, if you give everybody the benefit of the doubt, it's just that these MAGA events had never turned violent before. And if there was any violence, it was largely due to Antifa types attacking them and maybe getting some response. But basically, these were always peaceful demonstrations compared to a lot of other ones that they had to face, so they just really weren't that alerted by the whole thing. And when this radical group managed to instigate something else, they simply were unprepared for it. And that looks to me like the most likely theory. I mean, if you want to have a conspiracy theory, like she says, what about the idea that they deliberately left the security light so something like this could happen? And they deliberately ignored warnings. I don't think that's necessarily true, because the testimony is coming in that the warning came in an email very late in the day before, and it wasn't adequately related to all the right people, and there were other considerations that were dominating them until the actual break into the Capitol occurred, such as just security for the House and Senate chambers as the various legal proceedings of the electoral vote count were carried out and so forth. And so that's kind of what we got from that little hearing yesterday so far. Obviously, the Democrats are trying to continue to push their idea of an armed insurrection, although as far as we can tell, when they asked the question about firearms, basically the only ones that were confiscated apparently were confiscated just from a large crowd and were just probably people that either, I don't know, just chose to not understand how strict the laws are in D.C. or simply foolishly maybe ignored them and carried a concealed weapon or something. But essentially, there was no, as far as we can tell, there was no gun violence on the part of the crowd that moved into the Capitol at all. The only shooting there was by a security officer who shot one of the people, And other than that, the idea that it was an armed insurrection is absurd, unless you just, So this is again a typical exaggeration. Another thing, as I also point out, is she kept trying to say like the Proud Boys are white supremacists and this and that, but the Proud Boys are not white supremacists. I think they're anti-Antifa, they're anti-leftist, and they're against a lot of these leftist groups that do occupy things and attack, buildings. I mean, they're sort of a group, but they have members of more than one race in them, but they always like to throw out this lie and try to slander everybody like this, when in fact race is not really their motivation at all. I think that this is not to endorse them at all as a group or anything of the sort, but I am to say that they are being mischaracterized for political purposes. And by the way, I also attach a link to my latest video too, which I think is good, where I do take on this misuse of racial and white supremacy type terminology to characterize opponents of the Democrat Party in unfair and very dangerous ways. So anyhow, I just wanted to kind of hit this subject, which I thought was kind of a topical thing that's occurring, and we'll close for now and see what happens next. I don't want to make all these too long, and I think I pretty much hit the point here.